Hello folks, and welcome to our introduction to the ACT reading. I'm just going to go over some basic tips and guidelines for taking the ACT reading test successfully. First of all, you should note that there's 35 minutes and 40 questions spread across 4 passages. Each passage has 10 questions apiece. You have prose fiction, social science, arts and humanities, and natural science, typically in that order. When you approach the different questions on the test, there's a couple of different things you can do to help yourself. First of all, you have a little over 8 minutes per passage. So one of the things you can do is build yourself a timeline so that if your test starts at 9:30, you know that that first passage needs to be done at 9:38, and so on. One of the things you should also keep in mind is that leaves you with 3 extra minutes. So if you're ever under 3 minutes behind, you're actually good to go to be successful in getting the test done. And some students will be struggling with getting the test done, and maybe their goal is to get 3 of the passages done instead, at least at first. Now, tackling the passage, you're going to see over here that it tells you what kind of passage it is, and it tells you what the title is and perhaps what year it's from. So, for instance, this is a translated story called The Threshold from 1993, which is modern enough that you should be able to understand it. Scrolling ahead, you could see on the second page there are 10 questions. Typically, when you open up the booklet, the questions will be on the right side, the passage on the left. One of the things that's super important to do on the ACT reading is to think about how a teacher presents a text. For instance, if you're about to read a chapter in To Kill a Mockingbird, a typical teacher move would be to tell you what you should think about or look for as you read that chapter ahead of time, so that you can notice it as you read. The same strategy applies to the ACT reading. So the best move is to skip past the passage and look at the different questions that you'll be encountering, noting the most important recurring things to find as you read. So, for instance, you're going to look at the question stems. You're going to ignore the actual options for now because it's just too much information. But here it says, which of the following best describes the structure of the passage? Okay, so now as you read the story, you're going to have to think about how it's organized. Number 2 here, based on the passage, which of the following statements best describes the overall attitudes of the narrator and the woman? Well, now you know that there's a female character and that they both have overall attitudes that are worthy of noting. Number 3, it can reasonably be inferred from the passage that the woman most strongly desires to attain which of the following qualities from dreaming? Well, this is the first reference to dreaming, and now we know that there's a question about it. If you went through the entire passage, then you would be looking for the paragraph about dreaming, and in fact, you're going to find out that there's a lot about dreams in this passage. The whole thing is about dreaming. But as you read, you're going to have to note how the narrator feels about things, how this woman, who's not the narrator, feels about things. You could see by the word I that this is first person, and you have a little bit of focus if you've gone through the rest of the questions. This sometimes becomes even easier on the nonfiction passages. The social science, the arts and humanities, and the natural science, not to be confused with the science test, the natural science all have something in common in that they're all nonfiction passages that are informative, sometimes persuasive, but usually informative. And so you are going to be learning about different things. For instance, this one is about Ice Age, How Climate Made History, and it's written in the year 2000, which really in the grand scheme of things is not that long ago. So you know this is going to be about the Ice Age. You've already focused a little bit, but if you scroll past to the questions, you can see we've got a couple of things here, such as the main idea of the first paragraph is that the Little Ice Age, well, this one should be pretty easy to find because it tells you right where it is. However, number 11 here, the author most nearly characterizes the role of climate change in the course of history as one that, well, you're going to have to find where it talks about climate change somewhere in the passage. So question 11 is very likely to take a lot longer than question 12. One of the biggest tips that I could make for you, other than to pre-read the questions before you read the passage, is to actually do the questions not in the order they appear, but in the order that you think they'll be easiest to tackle. Knock a few of them out. If you found out about the woman's opinions about dreams in the previous passage, then go and skip to that question and answer it. Get as many of them done as possible, and as you're going through doing the ones you know, maybe you'll come across the answer of the ones you don't, which is another key strategy. There are easy questions that most students get right on every passage. You do not want to be forced to guess completely on the last passage, even if you are a slow reader. And so one of the things you need to do is be able and willing to recognize when a question is going to take too long, realize that that hard question is worth the same amount of points as that easy one that you may not even get to, and sacrifice that question. Choose your best guess, put a dot or a circle around the answer you think, then come back to it if you have time, but don't dwell on it. Your goal is not to get all of them right. Your goal is to get as many right as you can. And so the other strategy that's really critical is to make sure that you go strategically towards the test. You want to make sure that you are making choices about how you test that will allow you to get through as much information as possible and get as many questions answered as you can. One of the other things you should note is if one of the subjects on the ACT reading, such as Humanities, which is usually about something in the arts like painting or music, it can be a first-person narrative. It also can be, in this case, a famous biography of a famous musician, Louis Armstrong. One of the things that you might do is if you're interested in the topic that's shown in the title, do that one first. In fact, go through and glance at the titles and the opening sentence maybe of every passage and tackle the one that sounds most interesting. You're going to absorb the information better because you're going to have some already context. Like if you know a little bit about Louis Armstrong, this is a great one to start with. You don't need to know extra context, but it's going to make you go faster and be more accurate. Scrolling down to the science passage is usually pretty fact-heavy. This one is called Needles and Nerves, and it's essentially about acupuncture. And so one of the things that you want to do, you don't want to save this for last if science is your main content area that you're most comfortable with. Especially if the topic's interesting. Sometimes, even though social science or prose fiction are typically better for me, if the science passage is about something that I really like, I may even do that one first. And so you want to go strategically through the questions. Finally, there's a couple other small question types that you might want to note. For instance, as you pre-read the questions, anyone that says except, not, or least, like 31 here, or 37 down here, you want to circle those and make sure that you catch that. Number 38 is another question that's really important. It says, as it is used in line 49, the word concentrated most nearly means. Well, you need to go back and figure out what word you would replace concentrated with, and then look at the list. One of the things that ACT is really good at is making distractors that less careful readers or readers who are rushed for time might choose over the actual accurate option. And so the best way to combat that is to use fill-in-the-blank style answering strategies where you think up what the answer might be and then compare it to the answer options. The other thing on these word replacement questions, you don't have to worry about them in pre-reading, so you can skip it because you know exactly where it is. You don't need to think about it as you read. And you definitely do not want to try to do the question without looking back at the sentence, because oftentimes the ACT will be tricky and use a secondary meaning of the word or a meaning of the word that only makes sense in this particular context, not how you would typically use the word. So for instance, concentrated in this one, answer G, paid attention to, I find that to be less likely because that is just too easy. Now, it may be the answer. I have not actually taken this test right now, but I would suspect that the easiest answer here, probably not what they want you to look for. That ends our ACT reading prep. We will have more strategies and tips down the road in class, but I hope that this gives you a couple of ideas of what you can do to improve your score. Thank you.